This happened between 2015 and 2017, when I worked at an old restaurant called the Pinewood Lodge, located just outside of Manchester, New Hampshire. The place had a long and, for many, cursed history. The restaurant was attached to a stay and rest hotel, and behind it were small houses where some employees could live temporarily. That's how I met Ethan, a guy who was always there because his father worked at the restaurant. We got along well, so he often stayed at the staff to spend more time with me. The problem is that this place had a weird atmosphere, especially at night. The main hallway of the employees' homes was cramped, with faded yellow walls and doors that creaked with every passing breeze. At the end of the hallway there was an improvised laundry room where we used to get together to talk and kill time. But after a while, it started to be difficult to ignore the strange things that were happening. Sometimes, as we spoke, the lights would flicker and go out completely, for seconds, only to come back out of nowhere. I tried to laugh at it, to pretend I didn't care, but there was something worse. One night, while we were folding some towels, we heard a thin, broken laugh, like that of an old man trying to imitate a clown. None of us moved. We just stared at each other, trying to decide if we had heard the same sound. The worst thing is that it was not the first time that something bizarre had happened there. There were creaks in the house even when no one else was walking, whispers behind the closed doors, and a constant feeling that there were more people there than actually lived in the place. One of the cooks, Mark, swore he'd seen a man standing at the laundry window looking in, but when he went out to check, there was no one there. Ethan and I tried to keep a cool head and move on with life, but I knew it wasn't normal. In 2017, I officially started working at the Pinewood Lodge as a waiter. The restaurant had a cozy atmosphere for customers, but for those who spent enough time there, the feeling was different. The walls were lined with dark wood, decorated with old paintings and chandeliers that looked like they came out of another century. Some nights, as we closed the room, I felt like someone was watching me, even when there was no one else around. But the first time I saw something that really made me question my sanity was on an ordinary night when I went to pick up silverware from the warehouse. The warehouse was a narrow, stuffy corridor with metal shelves filled with boxes and utensils. I was in a hurry, grabbed a handful of forks and turned to leave when I bumped into someone. He was a boy, not more than 10 years old, wearing a light shirt and dark pants. "Oh, sorry, I didn't see you," I blurted out on automatic. But in the next second, my mind registered what was wrong. No children were to be there, and when I turned to speak to him, there was no one else. The corridor was straight, and I was covering the only exit. He just disappeared. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to rationalize what had happened. Maybe I had seen it wrong, maybe it was just fatigue playing tricks. But the more I tried to convince myself that it had been nothing, the more I felt that butterflies in our stomachs that we feel when something is very wrong. I went back to the main area of the restaurant, trying to act normal, but my coworker, Sam, noticed my expression and asked what had happened. I hesitated before telling, but when I mentioned the boy, I saw his expression change. He looked at me seriously and just said, "Did you see him too?" My stomach froze. Sam then told me that I wasn't the first to bump into that boy. Other employees had already seen a boy wandering around the restaurant, always at the most unlikely moments. Some waitresses spoke of small footprints appearing on the wet kitchen floor after hours, and one of them even swore that she once heard a childish laugh as she closed the cashier. No one knew who he was, but everyone avoided commenting on it, out loud. It was as if talking about him gave him more strength to appear. After that night, I began to notice more strange things. Objects moved, doors closed by themselves, and sometimes I heard light footsteps behind me when no one was around. The worst happened at the back of the restaurant, in that old part that resisted 2 fires. The employees called it the surviving piece, and even without knowing the whole story, everyone avoided being there alone. There was something different about that corner of the restaurant, as if he was stuck in time. One day I decided to ask Margaret, the oldest employee at the place, if she knew anything about the restaurant. She looked at me with a tired look and said she wasn't the type to get into these stories, but she let slip a detail that made me feel a shiver go up the back of my neck. Many years ago, A woman had stayed at the hotel next door, and, without anyone noticing, she did something. Against herself. The owners at the time tried to keep the story a secret, but since then, no one has been able to spend too much time alone in that part of the building without feeling like they were being watched. After hearing that, I started to pay more attention to that area of the restaurant. Whenever he passed by, he smelled a faint smell of burning wood, as if the fire had never really gone away. And then, one night, while we were closing everything, something happened that made my opinion change so completely. It was a quiet night without many customers, and I was helping to close the restaurant along with Sam and Margaret. Sam was in the kitchen counting the utensils, Margaret was closing the cashier, and I went to the stock to check what we needed to replace. As I pushed the heavy wooden door, I felt a strange shiver, but I ignored it. The storage room was dark and narrow, with tall shelves that made the space seem even smaller. I grabbed a clipboard to write down the items, and suddenly I heard a faint noise behind me, as if something small had fallen to the floor. I turned quickly, hoping to see something that might have fallen off one of the shelves. But there was nothing. The silence in the warehouse was suffocating. My mind told me to finish what I was doing and get out of there, but before I could move, I felt a sudden weight in the air, as if someone was behind me. My heart started beating faster, and my breathing became short. It was then that I heard a whisper right next to my ear, a childish, low voice, almost like a suppressed laugh. I threw the clipboard on the floor and got out of the storage room so fast I almost tripped. As soon as I left, I ran into Sam, who looked at me scared. "Did you hear that?" I asked, trying to catch my breath. He didn't answer right away, but I saw that his face was pale. "Yes, I heard," he muttered. Before we could say anything else, a loud noise came from the kitchen, as if something metal had fallen the floor. We ran to see what it was and found Margaret standing motionless, looking at one of the tables. "Was that like this when you left?" she asked, pointing to a set of cutlery neatly aligned in the center of the table. Something seemed strange, as if it had been placed there on purpose, but no one touched it. None of us even walked past that table after the last customers left. Silence took over the restaurant. I looked around, feeling a nagging chill on the back of my neck. The environment seemed darker than usual. Margaret sighed and picked up the cutlery. "This has happened before," she said quietly, as if it were something ordinary. But then she looked at us and added, "Only when he wants to play." That's when I realized that it wasn't just an isolated incident. Something, or someone, was there. I wanted to believe that Margaret was joking, but the way she held the cutlery with trembling fingers told me otherwise. Who wants to play?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "The boy," he said simply. "He pops up from time to time." Sam crossed his arms and shook his head, clearly annoyed. "Isn't that all in our heads?" he muttered, not facing anyone directly. But we all knew it wasn't. I decided not to insist at that moment, but the heavy atmosphere remained while we finished cleaning. Everything seemed normal until I went into the kitchen to get my coat. That's when I saw something that made my stomach turn. On the furnace, glass, fogged by the residual heat, was a small, crisp handprint. My breath was stuck in my throat. The hand seemed to belong to a child, short fingers, small palm, and the worst, it was facing inwards, as if someone was on the inside of the oven pressing against the glass. I swallowed hard and rubbed my eyes, thinking it was an illusion, but the mark was still there. I looked around, but there was no one else in the kitchen. Sam and Margaret were already at the door of the restaurant, ready to leave. With my heart racing, I took a cloth and wiped the glass, trying to ignore the feeling that something was watching me. But as soon as I finished, a high-pitched sound echoed through the room, a long, drawling creak as if someone were pushing a heavy piece of furniture. But nothing had moved. I ran out of the kitchen and found Sam and Margaret waiting. They noticed my pale look and asked what had happened, but I just shook my head. "Nothing. Let's get out of here soon." I locked the door behind me, feeling momentary relief as I breathed in the cool night air. However, as I turned to take one last look at the restaurant, I felt a shiver run down my spine. On the glass of the entrance, right at my height, there was another handprint, small, perfectly clear. Margaret took a long sigh as we walked to the parking lot. I wanted to believe that this was a coincidence, but deep down, something told me that it was not that simple. I tried to forget about it that night, but when I got home, I felt a strange weight in my chest. I lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling, reliving every detail of what had happened: the mark on the oven, the inexplicable noise, the impression of being watched. I closed my eyes, convincing myself that it was all just a suggestion of my mind, but even so, I slept badly. I woke up several times with the feeling that someone was standing in the corner of my room, even though I knew it was impossible. The next day, I returned to the restaurant for another shift. Margaret was already there when I arrived, organizing some things at the counter. "Did you see it again?" she asked bluntly. It took me a second to understand what she meant, but then I realized that she already knew. "The mark on the door," I whispered. She nodded slowly, as if it was nothing new. "It happens sometimes, but only with a few people." His expression was somber, as if he wanted to say something, but he didn't know how. During the shift, I did my best to distract myself. The restaurant was full, and that helped. But when I went to the warehouse to get more napkins, I felt a chill run down the back of my neck. It was a narrow space with wooden shelves on either side, and only a dim lamp hanging from the ceiling. I grabbed what I needed and turned to leave, but just as I reached the door, a dull thud echoed behind me, as if something had fallen. I turned slowly, hoping to find something on the ground, but everything was exactly as before. It was then that I noticed the highest shelf near the corner. A porcelain plate was slightly out of place, tilted forward. I felt my heart race. It was as if someone had pushed him lightly but hesitated to knock him down. I swallowed hard and got out of the warehouse as fast as I could. As I passed through the kitchen, I met Sam, who noticed my pale face. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," I lied. He didn't seem convinced, but he didn't insist. I returned to the hall, trying to ignore the uncomfortable feeling that had accompanied me since the night before. From that night on, I started paying more attention to the details around the restaurant. I had always had the impression that this place kept secrets, but now it seemed more evident. During one of my shifts, I heard footsteps coming from upstairs, where there were some offices and a small warehouse. I looked at Sam, who was near the bar, and he just shook his head. "No one is up there," he muttered. I decided to check it out on my own. I climbed the stairs slowly, feeling a tightness in my chest with each step. The hallway was dark, with a single light flashing on the ceiling. I opened the office door, and everything seemed normal. I looked at the storage room, but the door was locked. I stood there for a few seconds, listening only to my own breathing. As I turned to turn back, I heard a loud crack, as if something had been thrown against the wall. My heart raced. I ran down the stairs and found Margaret watching me with her arms crossed. "You went there, didn't you?" The way she asked made me feel like a child being caught red-handed. "I just wanted to see if there was anyone there," I replied, trying to control my breathing. She sighed, as if tired of explaining something that no one ever wanted to believe. "There are things in this place that are better not to touch." After that, I tried to follow the routine normally, but the restaurant seemed heavier. I began to notice strange little details: chairs slightly apart when no one had moved, lights flickering for no apparent reason, and worst of all, the feeling that someone was always watching me. It wasn't a common fear. It was something deep, instinctive, as if I knew that if I looked at the wrong place at the wrong time, I would see something I shouldn't. One night, when we were closing, I went to the customer's bathroom to take one last look. The door was ajar, and as soon as I pushed it away, I saw something that made me freeze. In the mirror above the sink, I was reflecting the image of a boy standing in the door of one of the bathrooms. How was this possible if it was just me and Sam in the restaurant at that moment? I stood there staring at the image in the mirror. My first instinct was to rub my eyes, thinking it was something in my head. But when I took a step back, I looked at the mirror again. The boy was gone. I felt a chill run down my spine. The sink began to drip, slowly and rhythmically, each drop resonating through the silent bathroom. I looked at the door, ready to get out of there as quickly as possible, when I heard a low whisper behind me. I spun at the same instant, my heart beating so hard it seemed to echo inside my head. There was no one there. The bathroom was empty, only the mark of a hand on the mirror and the dripping faucet. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. That must be in my head, I muttered to myself, but something inside me knew that it wasn't. Just that. I went back to the salon and tried to act normal. Sam noticed that I was strange, but didn't ask anything. Only after we closed the restaurant, when we were already leaving, did he look at me and say, "You saw it, right?" I locked in the middle of the parking lot. "Did I see what?" I asked, trying to sound indifferent. He lit a cigarette, took a puff, and let out the smoke before answering, "The boy in the bathroom, we've all seen him at least once." I couldn't sleep properly that night. Each time I closed my eyes, I felt as if someone was watching me in the dark. The images of the boy, the mark on the mirror, and the sound of the whisper kept repeating in my head. The next day, I decided that I would no longer enter that bathroom alone. Over the next few days, I tried to distract myself from work and ignore what had happened, but it was impossible. Whenever I passed through the corridor that led to the bathroom, I felt a strange weight in the air, as if something invisible was watching me. One night, while we were closing the restaurant, I had to go into the warehouse to get some napkins. The place was narrow and dimly lit, with tall shelves that cast strange shadows on the walls. As soon as I entered, I felt a shiver run down the back of my neck. I grabbed what I needed as quickly as possible and turned to leave. But at the same moment, I heard a noise behind me, as if something had fallen. My heart raced. Slowly, I looked back and saw that one of the boxes of cutlery was on the table, but before it was not there, it had moved by itself. There was no logical reason for that to happen. The worst was the sound that came soon after, a slight drag as if someone were there with me, moving the shelves. My breathing became short, my body paralyzed. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to convince myself that it was my imagination. But when I opened them again, I saw something that made me freeze. At the back of the warehouse, between two shelves, a pale, childlike face stared at me. The eyes were too dark, as if they were two black holes, and the skin looked strangely smooth, almost lifeless. I didn't stay there to find out anything else. I took a step back and ran out of the warehouse, slamming the door hard. Sam, who was finishing cleaning the room, looked at me startled. "What's wrong?" he asked, frowning. I looked at him, trying to find words to explain it, but all I could say was, There's someone in there." Sam sighed, as if he already knew exactly what I was talking about. "Don't worry," he said, scrubbing the counter again. "He doesn't do anything." After hearing this, I took my things and left, because I couldn't stay there for another minute. I came back the next day to resign and never went back there.